A book is not truly yours until you have written in it. Because of course when we buy a book off the shelf, it becomes our property. But only once we put pen to paper and externalized our thinking process onto the book itself and our notes, only then does it become intellectual property. It becomes part of our mind, part of our understanding and our knowledge. And in this video I want to tackle how we can approach that sort of note-taking system and how we can write effective notes and notes that help us consolidate what we know and apply what we learn to our broader understanding. But first, we ought to talk about some of the benefits of note-taking. For a start, it's a good way to read actively, to prime your mind to actually engage with what you're reading and focus, because it's easy to drift off and be passive if we don't really engage our mind by writing. You'll notice in lectures, if you go to college or university, students who don't write tend to drift off, and it's hard for them to really understand what is being said because they're not forced to translate it in their own words. And it's a similar story with writing. As we write and take notes in our book, we actively discuss with the author, and it's a very good cue for active reading. We all have our individual network of understanding, all these different ideas in our head that combine into what we know and how we perceive the world. And if we can write, we can ask questions, we can record interesting points, and all of that is useful for then later going on to apply them into our network of understanding, to patch the holes up and to really fill the gaps in what we lack and add on to what we already know. And note-taking is essential for that because it allows us to talk with the author literally and to externalize our thinking. And if we can't do that, then we can't fill those holes and apply our knowledge correctly. Now, one important thing to consider before I talk about how to actually go about writing these notes is that these notes are only useful if you go back to them in some sense and process them. It's easy to write notes and underline things and highlight things in the margin, but if we don't really go back to them and process them and integrate them into a sort of wider network of understanding, then it's almost lost. We really have to take those notes and do something with them. Now, I should say that this is my system of note-taking that I've tweaked with and experimented with throughout the years. And what works for you may not be what works for me, because we all have our own systems, and ultimately the system that works best for you is the one that you prefer and the one that fits in your process the best. Figure out what works best for you in terms of taking notes and consolidating your learning and going on to learn more using them. Now, the most basic technique that you're probably familiar with and might even do already is underlining. And that's really simple. It's just underlining any important sentence that stands out to you. It's probably going to be something that's essential to the argument in the chapter, or something that just stands out to you and is written in a powerful way. But there are some dangers to underlining, because while it's good for us to quickly glance back at the book and see, okay, well, that sentence is important, I can then process that somehow, we need to be careful to be selective in our underlining. Because the common mistake that I made was underlining so much that it became meaningless almost, it was pointless. So we need to be really careful about what we underline and only do it to things that truly matter, so that we can then turn back in the pages and see what was important and then write them somewhere else and process them in whatever way we want to. Now, the second tip is almost an extension of underlining, and it involves writing a vertical note in the margin, a vertical line, sorry. And that's done when we want to underline important passages that are too long to underline manually. So we want to just highlight the paragraph essentially. So it's more of a functional difference. Now, the third technique is only reserved for the most important parts in a book. Really, it should be used sparingly. And it's writing icons in the margin. Maybe it could be a star, it could be any picture that you use, doesn't matter. But the point is, it's meant to be used similar to underlining, but much more selectively and reserved only for the most important things. Maybe it's the core central argument or something that stands out to you like nothing else in the book. I like to use these icons as marking the most important sentence within each chapter. So there's only one per chapter. And by doing that, I can quickly flick back through the book and see, okay, where is this star I'm looking for? And I can see the star and get the gist of the whole chapter just there quickly. And it could even help for you to get those small little sticky index tabs and then put them in the pages, so that you can always go back and see exactly where the core of the story is, or the book you're reading. And that's just helpful for then going through the notes in maybe a second reading and processing them. Now, this technique is something I've invented myself, and I've found it to be helpful and I like it. And it especially applies to practical books that demand of us to go out and do something with the information we learn, be it personal finance or fitness, or any of those directly practical books that serve real life actionable advice. And it's writing exclamation points next to the sentences in the book that offer us direct advice on how to achieve a goal. So say you're reading a personal finance book, and one of the tips it says is, savings don't make you rich, investments do. And then you could put an exclamation mark in the margin next to that, and then later go back and see that, okay, this is one of these steps I will take from now on. And it could be explicit in the case of a guidebook that's written for that. But if there's a book where the actionable advice is more hidden and ambiguous, you might have to interpret that yourself and then write an exclamation mark, so that you can take that and then apply it in your own life somehow. Now, the next tip is more quality of life, to go back and read it later and have an easier time, and it's writing numbers in the margin to help you navigate a sequence of points that are all related somehow. Because perhaps there's a main argument in the book, and then the author's dividing it into sub-arguments. It could help you later on, if you're going back to the book, to just know that, okay, this is a sequence of arguments that are linked, and I should pay attention to that. So essentially put 1, 2, 3 for each argument used in that sequence. And it's just a helpful way to organize and structure your thinking in the book. Now, this next one I started doing recently, and I found it really works. And that's circling key terms in the book, or key words. Because authors, especially philosophers and books dealing with very technical and complicated things, they like to invent new words, new terms to better describe something. And as readers, a big part of understanding the book is knowing what those terms mean and in what sense the author uses them, so that we can follow his arguments more easily. And if we circle those key terms when they first appear and maybe annotate them and define them, then it helps us understand, okay, this is the language the author is speaking. I can now follow this better because I've identified that word and I see he's going to use it later on, so I need to remember what it means. For example, I recently read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and he uses the word being a lot. And I know that's a word used in philosophy in general, but the word being and order and chaos, all these words mean something in a particular sense that he's describing it. So if you can outline those and identify them, then you know to look for them, and you know that they mean something maybe different to what you originally believed. Now, a big part of knowledge and understanding is forming connections between ideas. If there's a point earlier in the book and you stumble across something later on that has a either explicit or indirect link, it could be helpful to just reference that in the bottom of the page with the page number. And that allows you to, when you go back through the book, to see, okay, I can flick back here and see this connection. And it doesn't have to be even a connection. It can be something that you noticed was ambiguous or contradictory, or something that was just, it disagreed with the original thing. And that really helps you cross-reference and criticize the author. Now, the last and most important thing that I do in my books is just writing. Write what you think, because when you write, you speak to the author. You externalize your thoughts onto paper and they become reality. For example, you could, in the margins, write questions that come to you while you read. What does this mean? Or like, maybe the author suggests something and you ask, well, what about, how does that apply in this situation? Or is this true even for X, Y, Z? And those questions that pop in your head while reading are great, because once you write them, you're then more inclined to seek the answer. And it can be very useful for just engaging with the book actively. Now, I should note that these notes will be brief and spontaneous. I do encourage you to, once you write them, use them to aid in your learning, but also then go back to them later and process them, expand upon them, and make them true notes that belong to you, and ideas that can apply to your life and that can fit into the context of the other understanding that you have. Because these are only fleeting notes. We write them temporarily and just to help guide our learning. Writing notes doesn't have to be boring. It can be literally whatever you want. It can be the immediate emotion that was raised to you. You can insult the author for all you want, just as long as you're engaging with the book and having that back and forth conversation and recording your emotions. Because if we make the book have emotional significance to us, then, well, I've read somewhere that that's good for memory consolidation. It's good for us to have the book's words applied to our life and to really hit home. And if you can do that by talking to the author almost, then we're bound to learn better. Of course, the margins don't always have enough space for us to write, and that can be frustrating. So we have to keep the notes short and brief. But I do encourage you to have a notebook by your side while you read, or something to record notes on. It could be digital, it could be physical, it doesn't matter. And that allows you to take more extended notes that you may then go on to process later. I like to have a notebook by my side so I can make more detailed notes that I can then process in my note-taking system later on and integrate it into my web of knowledge, let's say. Or you can write smaller notes in the margins and then go back later and expand upon them once you've read the whole book. Really any way to keep you growing and understanding more and engaging with the author and reading actively. So I advise you to go out and try it. Try all these tips, these different pieces of advice. See what works best for you. Because remember I said, this is only what works for me. And I'm still experimenting. I'm sure I'll stop doing some things in the future and start new ones later. So really go out and try them, figure out what works best. And I'd also love to hear what you do and what works for you, because so many comments I get with great ideas that I then go on to apply to my writing. So if you check out what other people are saying, then I'm sure there'll be great nuggets of wisdom there and great techniques that really help you absorb more of the book. And of course, thank you for watching.